I think from a sales perspective, starting at the top of the conversation, that sounds like the connection story, or is that the
hmm
origin? So why don't we start with the sort of connection story? How do you use a story to build a connection?
Yeah, perfect. So connection stories, these are tiny stories. What happens? You and everyone, all the listeners can think right now of the last meeting that they had with a customer, right? How did the small talk go? What did you talk about? And usually it's like, hey, good morning. How are you? Good. How are you? And maybe you talk about the weather. Maybe you talk about traffic. Maybe you talk about COVID. Talk about all these standard topics, and nothing bad with that, right? Everyone does it, but it's just standard. And with the standard, you're staying at the same level of relationship. And so what you can do instead is you can share a tiny story, one of these short, relatable stories to build a connection. Let me give you an example, okay?
Mm.
You want to ask me, how are you?
How you doing?
Good. Well, yesterday I had this little moment of disappointment. Yesterday I tried out for the first time padel. It's, I think, similar to pickleball in the US. And I thought, me as a former tennis player, I'll crush it. I'll be extremely good. Well, I hit every single ball in the net. I completely sucked at it. Anyway, when was the last time that you tried out a new hobby, and how was that for you? No need to respond unless you want to. But did you see there what I did? So someone asked me, how are you? And I choose to respond with this short connection story.
Interesting. And now that connection story is true today, but you could probably only milk that for, if I'm in sales, a week, maybe 2 weeks as your connection story.
Mhm.
Especially if you're doing like a multi-call close, you don't want to be like, if they're like, hey, how you doing? Be like, oh, they'll tell the pickleball story, and you're like, you did tell that last week.
True. Yeah. At the beginning, you may be using it one story a few more times, right? Or maybe this happened
Mm-hmm.
a week ago. But after some time, once you train yourself, you'll find these moments very quickly.
Hmm.
And then every moment you think for it for 10 seconds, you're like, okay, that's a good story. And then you'll share that. So it gets easier with time. At the beginning, you need some prefabrication a little bit.
So let's talk about what goes into building a connection story, because it sounds like it's probably a little bit deeper than I tried something last week and it didn't go well. So
Mhm.
help me understand, what are the things that you're looking for, and what are the components of a good connection story?
Yeah. So usually three components. First, transition in. Transition in is very much just one sentence where you get the other person excited. And you can say, I said, for example, I'm good. I had this, what did I say? I had this moment of disappointment yesterday. So moment of disappointment, that's already giving it some value. And you're like, ooh, what's about to come? Or if I say, I had this really interesting experience, or I read this odd article. So just one sentence that hooks your audience. That's one, transition in. Second is share your story. And the story can be anything that is more personal than weather or traffic. And that can be anything interesting that has happened lately. Maybe you picked up a new skill lately. Maybe there's some small thing that annoys you that is still fun to share, but really anything that is a little bit more personal, I'd say. The options are really infinite there. And then last step, and that's actually the hardest one, because the purpose of these connection stories is to build rapport with the other person. And you don't build rapport just by sharing a story, but you build rapport by getting the story from the other person. And so the last step, transition out, that's about asking a question where the other person can respond with a story in return. That is, for example, a story. A bad question would be, hey, how are you? That's bad, right? Because you wouldn't respond with a story. Or if I say, so how was your day? That doesn't get a story in return. But if I ask, hey, when was the last time that, I don't know, you went on a holiday with your family and how was that? Or when was the last time you tried a new sport? So all these, when was the last time, they ask for a specific moment and time. And that way you get a story in response. Also, if you ask for, let's say, the favorite or least favorite, best, worst, all of these extreme experiences, well, you'll get a very interesting story in response. So just to recap, it's transition in, share your story, and then transition out. And the one piece that is the most important, but the one that most people actually mess up, that's the transition out part. The question is the hardest. every single time in a workshop, that's the one where people struggle with the most.
I think this is one of the things I struggle with the most just in general in my sales career, which was I was really great at telling the story or really great at sharing a thing, but then I would just end. And everybody's like, what are we supposed to do with what you said? Cool, great. And then somebody like changes the topic. There was no like consistently, I guess as the salesperson, as somebody who's kind of leading the call, you want to tell them what's next. Sort of like I'm running a podcast. I've got the kind of outline in front of me. I know roughly how to do this, and I'm going to lead you to where we're going to go next.
Exactly.
Same role in that sales call.
Yeah, it's surprising. The question you need to prepare in advance, and not only for connection stories, but for any stories. You want to make sure, okay, how can I transition out of that? Because as you right now just said, people make it so awkward. They're like, all right, so that's my story. They get a standing ovation. They get very awkward about it, right? And so you want to make it as smooth as possible for the other person. So yeah, in the connection story, it's about asking them if they had an experience similar to that, or what was their experience like. And for the others, we'll talk about how you can transition out of these stories.
Gotcha. And so is the transition in, share the story, transition out kind of framework, is that going to be similar through the other two story types? Or does it vary a little bit?
It varies a little bit. Connection stories, because these are tiny stories. It's not big story structure. It's not big on the elements. It is a different structure. For the other two, I use the same structure.
Okay.
But
and then from a timing perspective with the connection story, is there like is it minute 27 as well, or do these tend to be shorter?
They're tiny. They're 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds if it's an incredible story, but these are really, really short. Because when someone asks you, how are you? And you start sharing, 3 minutes of what happened. The person, I didn't ask for that. What are you sharing?
You just take 10% of the call with a connection story. It's a 30-minute call.
It's also, people are at the beginning a little bit skeptical, right? They're like, oh man, this is awkward. I don't want to talk about myself unsolicited. This is weird. But what I'd suggest everyone, hey, the cool thing is you can try them out so easily. Every one of us is being asked every single day, multiple times, hey, how are you? So try for yourself. For myself and for my clients, I'd say 8 out of 10 times, very positive interaction. 2 out of 10 times, maybe neutral reaction, where it's like, okay, cool. Hey, let's go into business. But never have I had a bad experience with these type of connection stories.
And what's the value of, or I guess like we talked about the objective is to kind of build a rapport. I guess what's your ideal outcome here? Like you share a story, they share a story, and then like I guess what is that helping us accomplish? I'd just love to kind of frame out the value before we move on to the next one.
Yeah. It's getting to know each other on a deeper level. Ideally, you know something that matters to that other person. The person knows something more about you. And even, let's say, months later, you still remember that one thing about that person. It just makes all future interaction much smoother. And the other person will also be more positive throughout the conversation because you've already created this mutual bond at the beginning.